IRS is using artificial intelligence to catch tax evaders. The agency's website says it uses AI to identify sophisticated schemes to avoid taxes.
It could come in handy for stopping criminals, but there are some concerns. Now, the House Judiciary Committee is opening an investigation into the tax agency's use of AI. Joining us live over Zoom this evening is Dan Faggella, founder and head researcher at Emerge Artificial Intelligence Research. Thank you for being here with us.
Glad to be here with you.
So as someone who's watching this world closely, we just want to start with your thoughts on how quickly AI, artificial intelligence, is growing really by the day.
Yeah, it's monumental at this point across essentially every enterprise sector that we're following. And this case with the IRS actually tracks really well with what we've seen as a broad trend in the private sector. The last even 6 or 7 years in the finance space, fraud detection, whether that be for lending, whether that be for insurance, whether that be for payments or even money laundering, has been one of the low-hanging fruit use cases. So some of what we're seeing with the IRS is very much in line with what we've been seeing, but you are right, things are very much picking up steam now.
So what do we actually know about how the IRS is using AI? The service announced back in September of last year that it was going to use AI to identify sophisticated schemes. But today in Washington, we're hearing from House Republicans that they believe the IRS is using it to spy on individuals en masse. To your knowledge, is there any evidence of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have access under the hood at the IRS. I mean, we work in both the public and the private sector. In the public sector, it's mostly defense, frankly. But it likely is nearly identical to what we see in other domains in finance. So what data they have access to, tough to say, but there is an inevitable transition here from, let's say, picking into 1 in every 200 cases the IRS could look to and just having a human investigate a sample, to having artificial intelligence find commonalities across known fraud and being able to use those sweeping patterns across the rest of the populace to be able to determine where the fraud might be. I think the big question here from a policy standpoint is that drawing upon data that was never granted by the citizens or is in some way against the law? So exactly what they're doing, tough to say. The trend itself is not going to go away, and the government as well. But I think the nitty gritty here is what are they using and how, and I think there's much more to learn there in this case.
As artificial intelligence continues to evolve and we use it in different sectors, what kind of safeguards do you think we should see in place to maybe help prevent some of those problems or the potential of any problems?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. So we've got very near-term use cases like this where, to be frank, again, this kind of screening for insurance fraud, or if you're doing a money transfer somewhere, it's very likely that this technology is being used on that right now. So in that context, nobody's up in arms about it. I think the IRS is a spooky name, and so people are associating a lot of spook to it. And of course, the government may be accessing things that private companies couldn't. We really should look under the hood at what data they're drawing on. I think there is a level up here in terms of data sovereignty. That is to say, if the government, or private companies for that matter, are able to make really robust predictive decisions about sort of what to investigate, what to do, who to give a loan to, who not to give a loan to, what data should be permitted and should not be, and is there a way to hold that accountable? I think that whole ecosystem has to level up. I also think there's much broader conversations and bigger dialogues that are going to happen about the government actually sort of handling AI development at a national level. I think we're about to see leaps in this technology that are so gigantic that they'll very likely shake up the job market and very likely shake up sort of day-to-day human life in a really, really robust way, like much larger leaps than ChatGPT. And I think people will probably make much more noise for the government to do something about that than they will about exactly what kind of financial data is being used in their, the IRS process.
Sure. And on that job market note, I mean, one of the chief concerns when this conversation really started to take off was that AI might replace many jobs. There's been a lot of conversation about the IRS being able to hire how many employees the IRS has. Do you think that this might be a way to limit the number of human employees the IRS or any other agencies have?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of very important replacement conversations. You've listened to some of the leading scientists like Yoshua Bengio, Jeff Hinton. They're of the belief that in the coming decades, we might have, species level replacement, existential concerns, never mind jobs. But if we want to hang there for a second, I would say in the private sector, which is very much a portent for the public sector, we're not seeing mass layoffs now. What we're seeing is when people start a new project, it's possible to do that with less staff. But the economic pressures have not been enough for, let's say, a Geico or a US bank to start sloughing off huge tranches of people working on fraud in a manual way. But I do think that will happen. I think that will happen again much more slowly in the public sector where there is no competitive pressure to drive those efficiencies. And again, I think well ahead of those big layoffs, I think are going to be much, much bigger scares about the existential concerns of AI.
I think with a lot of people, when it comes to artificial intelligence, there is a little bit of fear there. So for the general public that's
Yeah.
hearing these things, seeing things on social media, maybe just reading headlines, what would you say about just the overall concern with what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in touch a little bit with the everyman, but much more likely we're in touch with sort of the leading researchers in the field. So we think about the people that are genuinely driving the science forward, and we think about the buyers and the sellers of sort of the big multi-million-dollar engagements of this technology in the enterprise space. And we've seen a really consistent drum roll in the last 18 months of more and more folks concerned with how big the next leaps forward in capability might be. And if we might need to get on the same page at an international level around how we're developing this. So what can the person on the street do? I think follow the technology and see where it's headed, but I do think there's likely to be a broader international vision around what are we turning into here that the citizenry will be able to be part of, that senators will actually talk to their constituents about. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I will tell you the people on the screaming edge are relatively consistent, more and more of them converting to the camp of this is coming soon. And the citizenry broadly is going to want to mold how the heck this integrates with humanity.
Yeah. Well, as we get closer to that point, we hope you'll join us again to share your insight.
Absolutely.
It is invaluable. Dan Faggella, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys. Hope I'm still around for that.